I know we've been looking for you, at least a lot of media has been looking for you, primarily because you sit at a position where you both inwards, of course, because of your origin, and outwards, and you can reconcile the two and tell international players, this is where we're headed. So tell us where we're headed.
Look, we are at the cusp of something very important in Africa. There's now a position on the continent which recognizes the significance of Africa as an agricultural producer. There's also a welcome recognition on the part of international markets that Africa is needed, that Africa is open for business, and this is a place where investments can make real returns. But the challenge always is to link the resource that is available, the capital that is available, with the smallholder farmer who needs the inputs, who needs the markets in order to flourish. And Africa is about smallholder farming. It's about linking those farmers to regional and global markets. That's a challenge, but it's a challenge which, if we achieve the potential that is there, can really transform the continent in this green revolution that we all seek.
Fantastic. Another challenge has been the succession plan, so to speak, as we've been discussing earlier. Moving now from agriculture being an area that was considered maybe for people who are a bit older to making it cool enough for the youth, or more gender sensitive. And you have very strong opinions about that.
What is cool is what is profitable. That's the reality. And we have got to make agriculture profitable for young people. We've got to make it something that is seen as a career. And that means not just talking about farming, it means talking about agribusiness, about processing, about all those agricultural services that go into making our farms as productive as they could be. It also means, and importantly, making sure that young people can do two things more easily than at the moment. One is to access finance and capital. Banks are notoriously adverse to lending money to young people. We need to address that issue. And the second is to make sure that young people get their hands at a reasonable age on some of the policy levers that actually determine agricultural policy. And where that doesn't happen, then at least the policy makers learn not just to hear young people, because young people must make a clamor, must make a noise, but importantly, listen to them. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Policymakers, politicians, like myself of a certain age, need to listen better.
Right, I like that. They need to listen better. What about this? In regards to the amount of money needed for the agriculture sector, for example, banks are very risk averse. They say, you know what, we'll not touch that now. The more digital methods of financing are coming up, but what's a healthy mix?
Look, I think we've got to recognize that markets are necessary. Markets, however, need an enabling environment. Government has to provide that. That's a combination of regulation. It's a combination of government interventions in the financial marketplace in order to produce concessionary capital, in order to get that mix between grants and loans and private capital, in order to generate more resources internally. Africa's got to do that. Africans have got to invest more in Africa. And that's a challenge, because I'm afraid all too many would rather invest their money on the London property market, or in homes in the south of France, or in New York or Miami, or wherever, than actually invest on the continent itself. That has to change. But also, we have to see more of what we saw and have seen at this conference. That is, ministers of agriculture and ministers of finance appearing on the same platform and saying, Africa, in this case Ghana, is open for business. That's very important. You know, I've been around the block. I've been a finance minister. I know that sometimes governments don't always work as effectively as they should do. They work very often in silos. But if you can get ministers of trade, ministers of finance, ministers of agriculture all working together, that's a plus for the small farmer, that's a plus for the agri-entrepreneur, and it enables the sort of intervention that the African Enterprise Challenge Fund seeks to enable. Interventions that are about loans and grants, bringing in donor money in order to fix markets, to meet the needs of the missing middle, in order to impact on rural lives. AECF has impacted on more than 8.8 million households in the agricultural economy as we speak. We could do more. Others could do more if we had the enabling environment and if we had the political will to do so. The good thing about conferences like this is that they indicate that there is and has been some real progress in that area, but still much more to do.
Fantastic. All right, let's just segue to one last question. The food security conversation, of course, is one that we should be having more prominently. When Cyclone Idai, for example, unfortunately hits the African coast, we were curious about what the initial response for bodies such as yours were.
Well, our initial response, because we have investments in Malawi, we have investments in Zimbabwe, we have investments in Mozambique. Our initial response was to reach out immediately to the companies in whom we have investments and say, how can we help? What's the message you want us to send back to the donors? So that's important, solidarity and addressing the needs. What we'd also like to do is to see a greater bridge between humanitarian responses and developmental responses. One of the failures of the international community, one of the failures of international financial institutions is that they very often keep them in very separate silos. So humanitarian folk don't speak to development folk. The fact is we need an integrated approach to the humanitarian and the development. That applies in relation to agriculture. It also applies in relation to water and sanitation. Even as we build up in the aftermath of humanitarian disasters, we need to build for sustainability in the face of what is going to be an ongoing climate change challenge.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lord Boateng.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it.